I'd like to introduce our presenters for this evening, and I'm going to let them give more insight into their background. But Danny McGray from the Mason Lake Conservation District and Kathy Winchesky from a few are going to be our main presenters. And then June Galley and Heidi from the DNR will be making comments related to some of the programs around invasive species at the state park itself. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Danny, who's going to start.
All right, thank you. Give me 1 minute here and I'll pull up a presentation for everybody and we can get it rolling. All right, how's that working? Can everyone see that?
Good.
Presentation? Thanks, Patrick. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Danny McGarry. I'm the Executive Director for Mason Lake Conservation District. So we're based out of Scottville. We basically exist to help out our landowners, local community with managing natural resources. Where the DNR does that on state land, we do that mostly on private land. And so today we're kind of talking about invasive species issues. A hot topic for us is hemlock woolly adelgid, or HWA. And since this is happening both on state park land and on private land, I thought it'd be a great topic for tonight. And then we'll also touch on some other priorities in the county for invasive plants. But first, a shameless plug, I want to just let everyone else know about other things that we do at the Conservation District too. So most people know us for our tree and shrub seedling sale that we do. Every spring we sell tree seedlings. We also sell seed mixes for wildflowers, beach grass plants for erosion, and other conservation products just to help out around the home and garden. We sometimes have a tree planting crew for those jobs that are a little too big for you to maybe want to plant on your own. And we rent farming equipment out too to help out with our farmers and help with soil conservation practices. So they're kind of doing the best they can to keep their soil healthy and their fields happy. We even do odd things like fish day, where you can buy fish for your home pond. And we host the hazardous waste cleanup with lots of volunteers and friends to help us every August. So that's another thing that we do. You may have seen one of our staff members out and about. We have a forester on staff to help with your back 40 if you've got tree issues or want to manage timber harvest, things like that. Our MEEP program does a sustainable agriculture approach to farming and helps our farms in the community make sure they're doing all the right things and protecting the environment. And then we're just here to offer technical advice too for maybe stream bank erosion or improving fish habitat, or even something like developing a natural shoreline like you see here in the picture on the right. So while we do a lot with trees, we have a number of other things too. So I just wanted to kind of share that today. But back to the main topic for tonight, our invasive species issues. So as I mentioned, hemlock woolly adelgid is kind of a hot topic around Mason County right now in the state park and on private property. And you may have seen these images in the news. So hemlock woolly adelgid is a very tiny insect pest. It's from basically the eastern region, eastern part of Asia, but has been here in the Appalachian region and now recently in Michigan. And what you see here, these little white parts on the tree branches are called ovisacs. And those aren't the insects themselves, but the insects are inside there. And this waxy material is kind of what they excrete as they're feeding off of the tree sap. So you will always see them right at the base of the needles on a hemlock tree, and only on hemlock trees. And then they feed on the base of the needles, basically sucking the sap out of that tree and eventually starving it of energy and nutrients. So within 4 to 10 years, if not treated, those trees will become pretty unhealthy and die. I have the two different pictures here because I just wanted to show you how different it could look. The picture on the left is what we often see in the news or as sort of the poster child picture for hemlock woolly adelgid. The picture on the right is what we see here in Mason County when we are looking for this tiny insect. So I circled the branch because it's hard to make out, but there are tiny white little ovisacs at the base of those needles. And so this is a pretty light infestation, which is what we've been looking for around the county. So just to give you an idea of how different it could look and how hard it might be to spot when you're out looking at your trees in the backyard. So with the last couple of years, there have been a lot of survey efforts around the state. We are just a tiny part of that. So on this map, you can see all of the dots show basically an acre that has been surveyed in the state. The blue dots are 2018 data, and the red dots are surveys that happened through last winter and this winter. So lots of people are out there around the state checking on our hemlock trees, looking for this insect, and trying to make sure that we're keeping our forests healthy. We, as the Conservation District, are part of a group called a SISMA. That's a Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. And so we work on private land, as do other SISMAs and conservation districts all around the state. And so a lot of the work here that's shown is on private land being done by the groups I just mentioned. And then our partners here with the DNR are doing similar surveys on the state land at state parks, and also helping out on federal land with areas like we have Nordhaus Dunes in the National Forest. So it's a huge group effort, lots of people out there, everybody collaborating together to make sure that we're protecting this resource. To kind of zoom in now and get a little more detailed on what we're doing for surveys, these are happening in the winter. It may seem counterintuitive that we're looking for bugs in the winter, but it's the easiest time to see those little white ovisacs on the underside of the branches. And so we, through our office at the Conservation District, had a crew of 2 people that are seasonal workers that were out all winter. Even when it's blowing snow 20 miles an hour and it's only 5 degrees out, our crew were wonderful. They were troopers. They didn't let the snow stop them, and they looked at trees all over the county. And so just to give you a snapshot of some stats, we worked with landowners in mostly the very western portion of Mason County, within about 5 miles of the lake shore. And we were able to survey 236 different properties. The acreage for all those properties was over 4,000 acres. That's not to say we walked every single foot of all those acres. We try to focus where we could, where we know hemlock trees are, and make kind of best use of our time and cover as much ground and as many trees as possible. Now, at the end of the season, our crew wanted to just get a rough idea of how many trees they really went and looked at. And so they came up with some big numbers based on average trees that they look at per acre. And they usually look at about 3 or 4 branches. So they figured roughly they probably looked at about 62,000 trees this winter and over 187,000 branches on those trees to check for this tiny little insect. So I was so happy we had them. They did a wonderful job, and they covered a lot of ground. So to let you see what that looks like, here's sort of the zoomed in Mason County map. And so again, the red dots were the surveys for this winter and last winter. Again, a lot of our efforts obviously focused closer to the lake shore. I should mention the reason for that is because that's really throughout Michigan where this pest has been found. The mitigating temperatures closer to the lakeshore seem to have more of an effect on letting this pest make it through the winter. We tend to get colder temperatures inland, so that might be kind of a limiting factor for this little insect to keep on growing. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we've been and the ground that we covered. And these surveys are basically like a spot check, we'll say. We're kind of walking through the woods, covering 1 acre at a time and checking, as I mentioned, so many trees per acre, just sort of as a spot check. And if anything looks unhealthy or we do find an infestation, then we spend a lot more time there to really get a handle on what's present. Since we're focused on Ludington State Park, I just wanted to zoom into that area too to kind of show you how we've been working close to that area. Again, our work is really focused on private lands, and working with our partners at the DNR they've got all their ground covered, and they're doing the same thing in the green area on the map here. So basically we're doing the same job, just on different parts of the map. And so with all those surveys, oh, and I wanted to mention, if you're interested, all of this data is publicly viewable. I've got the name of the website here on the bottom. It's just called the Michigan HWA Survey Viewer. If you want to go mess around with it, it's an interactive map. So if you just Google HWA Survey Viewer, you can find it. Check that out for yourself. And so if you play around with it, you can get to a point at which you can see anything that was submitted as a pending verification. And what that meant is that we found things that looked like hemlock woolly adelgid, or we were pretty sure that it was, and those get sent to the lab for a whole bunch of other people to look at and identify for sure. And so I can tell you, and you may have seen this in the news already, earlier in the winter, we had positive infestations that are in the south area of the county around Bass Lake, also Ludington School Forest, some near Epworth and near the south end of Ludington State Park. And so those are areas that we know we have infestations, and on the upside, there's something that we can do about it. And so we are working on that next. So for sort of treatment and next steps, there are things that you can do at home, and there are things that we're working on our end of it too. So, and the same is happening at the DNR too, and we'll get some input from Heidi here hopefully in a second. So on the conservation district side of things, we had applied for a grant from the DNR, the Invasive Species Program, and that was recently awarded. So we're working on building up a program that has a full-time coordinator for managing hemlock in our area and areas to the north. So far, we have not confirmed any in Manistee County, so that's good, but it does seem that the population is moving north, so we want to be able to manage that and hopefully do our best to get that contained if we can. So we'll be hiring a coordinator, and we will have crews that can go out and help treat on private property for those landowners that are interested. And then we'll continue to survey in the winter to make sure that we don't have more popping up in other areas that we hadn't known it before. And then finally, the education portion of it, just like we're doing this evening, I'm thankful we have you joining us so we can kind of share the information, and hopefully you tell your neighbors and get the word out to just go out and check your trees. And you can do some of these things that I have listed on the slide. Just look at the tree branches in your backyard if you have hemlock trees, and look for those little white ovisacs. You might still find them this time of year, but like I said, easier to find in the winter. Be mindful if you go out camping and you have tall RVs or equipment that could brush up against hemlock trees. Those little tiny insects could be carried along with you. The same thing might go for construction equipment. If you have some big equipment that's coming on your property to do work, same thing applies. There has been some information about possibly spreading this pest through movement of birds, which we obviously can't do much about. But if you have bird feeders in your backyard and they're near hemlock trees, you might consider moving those or taking them down just as a precaution. And keeping in mind that if you have hemlock trees, don't move that yard waste. If you don't need to, maybe burn it at home, bag it and get rid of it, rather than potentially moving that pest around in your yard waste. So those are kind of just some tips for hemlock management. And I have a little bit more information on other invasive species, but I kind of want to pause there, and hopefully we can get Heidi to join us or some other folks from the DNR and just maybe kind of share a little bit about the process on their end for doing some survey and treatment work.
Great. Hi there, Danny. Hi, everyone. My name is Heidi Fry. I'm a forest health specialist in DNR Parks and Recreation Division in our stewardship unit. I oversee our HWA response. I work closely with Jim Galley. Jim, do you want to introduce yourself just real quick?
Yeah, I'm Jim Galley. I'm the park manager at Ludington State Park, and I've worked with Heidi now for quite a few years on invasive species issues at the park. In addition to the hemlock woolly adelgid, which is the most recent focus that we've had. You know, you may remember Heidi from garlic mustard pulls that we've done in the park, or Japanese barberry as well. Great wealth of knowledge for us, and you know, happy to have her join us to talk about, you know, specifically what happened at the park.
Yeah, and I can share some of that as soon as I can figure out how to share my screen. I think I have that. So hang tight 1 second, and we'll go over here, and hopefully you can see my screen. I can't see everyone, so if I can get an affirmative that.
You've not shared yet. So
Okay.
you have PowerPoint open in the background and you're doing share screen, right? And so can you
Yep,
see?
I hit share screen and
And then it should come up and you should be able to click the screen you want
I
to share.
see that. I gotcha.
Looks like it's starting now.
Yep.
Oh, good deal. Okay. So thank you, Danny. Danny did a really great job describing hemlock woolly adelgid. So at this point, everyone should be able to tell what they're looking at in this picture. This is, of course, hemlock woolly adelgid. This was our first detection of hemlock woolly adelgid in Michigan state parks. And this was the first occurrence on state of Michigan managed land at PJ Hoffmaster back in 2017. We have been actively managing HWA in state parks since 2017 with our field staff. And I'll get into a little bit of what that entails. And there's some of our crew. We work with AmeriCorps. We partner with AmeriCorps and the Michigan Civilian Conservation Corps. And there's a couple of our Corps members there. I always like to mention that because we put in a lot of effort into training and developing young talent within the natural resources field through our Michigan Civilian Conservation Corps program. A lot of people know the name Civilian Conservation Corps and think of, you know, tree planting days and FDR and really the birth of that kind of programming. But this is something that is still alive and well within the DNR. It's housed within Parks and Recreation Division. And we have 4 different crews that accomplish a lot of great work for us on the ground. I lead, currently we have a 6-person crew that's dedicated just to forest health. They're all forest health technicians and work primarily on hemlock woolly adelgid, oak wilt, and Asian longhorn beetle surveys, and all kinds of other fun field stuff, sometimes tree planting. I think we had a lot of great participation from the Friends in the past for tree planting, and MCCC participated in that. We do have another crew that focuses on habitat restoration based out of Brighton. And then our crew at Belle Isle at the Anna Scripps Whitcomb Conservatory that focuses on the conservatory grounds and the rare plants housed within that structure. And we have a sign shop. So our MCCC crew based out of Hartwick Pines produces all the great signs that you see within Ludington State Park and state parks all across the state. The crew I lead is based out of Muskegon. And through our partnership with AmeriCorps, we've been able to leverage about $112,000 worth of education awards to pay off past grant or loans, or they can put that towards future education. So it's really a great program, training program to get folks real world experience and helping us manage some of the resources on the ground. So here's some of our numbers. I'm not going to get into too much specifics again, because Danny did such a great job covering hemlock woolly adelgid and the current infestation and where it is. We know HWA to be within these 8 state parks. Our first detection back in 2017 was at PJ Hoffmaster. At that point, we began working very actively surveying and treating trees within the park, and really fine-tooth surveying other parks within that area. It was then we discovered infestations at Muskegon, Duck Lake, Silver Lake, Saugatuck Dunes, and Charles Mears. When the detection at Charles Mears occurred, that was the northernmost extent for a little bit, I think maybe a year, until the detections in Mason County, and then that led to the detection last October at Ludington State Park. And as you all know, after that, through the work of the SISMA and Danny's crew, out there, having detected so many more detections on private lands. So that's where we stand within state parks and state land. You can see in this table kind of a summary of all the trees that we've treated so far and the acreage that we've covered. In those parks, those 8 state parks that you see listed, this is as of October of last year. So as of October last year, we had 31,000, just over 31,000 trees treated, and over 191,000 inches in diameter. That represents almost 2,000 acres of treated land. And I gotta move this a little bit to see my numbers. Our survey acreage is, at this point, it was 18,000 and almost 19,000. It's since grown a bit since this time. These numbers are from October. And so our crews have been actively out surveying. Like he described, this is all weather type work. You can see a crew member at Hoffmaster, and you don't see the temperature on that day. You just see the snow and the snowshoes. But it's we've been out in negative degrees and surveying uphill, downhill, and icy conditions, all looking for this little itty bitty insect on hemlock trees. So when we survey, we break the park acreage up into these little acre block segments. So you see this little square down here in the corner here, that represents 1 acre. Our target is to hit 30 trees per acre. So when you think about, all of the acres that we've covered, 19,000 acres, multiply that by 30 trees. Some acres we get more, if it's a really dense acre block and we want really thorough, coverage, we go up and close up inspect more than 30. But that's our target, is to hit 30 trees per acre, walking in and out of those hemlock forests. This example here is of Orchard Beach. And if you folks don't know Orchard Beach State Park, it does have a small hemlock component. And while we're out surveying and we're looking for HWA, we're also at that same time mapping where hemlock exists. And that's what you see, these green blocks. And that really helps us in the continual effort to survey, so that in subsequent years, we can continue to go back and really just focus on those acres that have hemlock. It saves us a lot of time instead of having to manually survey, all these other acres here. Our current survey priorities are Petoskey, Leelanau, Young, and Fisherman's Island, and that's based on that map that Danny showed, that showed where all the current infestations are and all of the existing survey effort. Our treatments consist of basil bark spraying, and you may see some of these guys out in the park. You'll see them in DNR member uniforms that should help identify them. Doing basil bark sprays on trees, and in some instances, tree injections, injecting the product directly into the tree in areas where we have found infestations in Ludington. And I'll show you that map in a second where those infestations exist. This is not Ludington, so don't be alarmed. This is an example of Silver Lake State Park, and I wanted to throw this up just to give you a sense of what we're doing within our response in state of Michigan managed lands. This is the southern portion of Silver Lake, in an area that was really hit hard with HWA. And I think when most people think of Silver Lake State Park, you might just think of the dunes and the open dune area and the rides and the recreation that occurs there. There's actually a fairly large and dense hemlock component there in the southern end of the park that's really not used as much as some of the other areas of the park. So on that southern edge, this is, I think if you look up on this map, you'll see this is the lighthouse day use area here on the left. All of these red dots represent trees that are either infested with hemlock or close enough to an infested hemlock where they were treated for HWA. And all of these little squares here, these are all acre blocks where we've walked and surveyed hemlock trees within there to really fully treat hemlocks within that area. So that's kind of just an overview of how we manage those. If I can, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if it's possible, I want to jump over to our live map. I pulled that up for, and I apologize for the delay. There we go. All right. And hopefully this, you can see this now. This is obviously everyone is familiar with this shape. There's Ludington State Park. We can zoom in, and just for folks to get a sense of the infestation at the park, we've surveyed Ludington State Park many times. You can see the whole park's outline. We've mapped forest with hemlock component. All that green is hemlock. And I'll turn on our crew tracks. Here's everywhere we've walked. That's all the mileage that the crew has put in out there. I think on an average year, we put in about 3,000 miles on the ground walking through state parks. And so that network of tracks gives you a sense for how much work they're doing out there. When we zoom in, you can see some different colors here, and those different colors indicate places that have been treated for HWA. You'll see the orange here, that's an area that's been treated, as are the yellow. And we'll pull up some of all of these red dots here. Those are trees that are either positive for HWA or are close enough and within a buffer zone where we are treating them in the same fashion, with the hope that if they are HWA positive, we're catching that infestation early enough so it will not spread on. So, so far in that park, I'm giving you the inside view of all of this information that we collect on hemlock trees and treatments. We can look at how many trees were treated in the park. And that's not the layer I want. And hopefully folks have been able to, if you see folks out there treating, yeah, so we have so far treated 2,000 inches. That's showing up on my screen at the park. And that includes 7 of the 8 trees that we did find that were infested. So we'll begin treating this spring in May to finish off some of the work that we were not able to do last year. When we detected HWA, we were actually pretty fortunate last year to have a pretty mild fall. And that gave us the weather and it allowed us to be pretty nimble to respond very quickly with treatment. So we made our first detection there on October 17th. We turned right around and we began treating that very same week. And by the end of November, we're able to treat all infested trees with one exception. So we're really, really thankful that we were able to make that detection. And then that also enabled Danny and her crew to be able to begin the survey work on the neighboring properties and in the neighboring vicinity. So that speaks to the partnership that Danny was mentioning earlier. But that's really all I have as far as our status and where we are with HWA management in the park. We do also manage for several other invasive species within the park. Here again is that park shape, and hopefully everyone can still see my screen. The dots that you see on the screen, and thankfully there's not that many of them. It's not like our hemlock infested trees. You'll see these white points here. Those are all points where we know we have garlic mustard, and we do manage those areas. We map them and track those populations annually and rely on volunteers and the help of the park staff to help us manage those areas. This point here that I've highlighted, this little X'd out spot, that's a point that has been treated mechanically with hand pulling. And as of 2017, that was the last time it was observed. It's no longer there. And so that's the best case scenario is to be able to treat these points and turn them all into X's. And that's hopefully something that we'll be able to really pick back up on this this summer. So that's all I have for our update on HWA. Jim, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that's a great overview of what's been done there. I guess if there are any specific questions at the end of the presentation, we can try to answer those.
Yeah, one thing I'll add is that we have been doing a lot of invasive species control throughout Michigan State Parks. We've been doing that for many years. We, working with volunteers, have amassed around $5 million worth of volunteer hours just in service in pulling garlic mustard, in treating things like Japanese barberry, and in planting trees like at Ludington State Park. I'm really happy that we're going to be able to continue a lot of that work now that we have a new natural resource steward on board. So we have a new position, Emily Leslie, and she's in the meeting as well. So she's getting a nice overview of what has occurred at the park and in the area. But she'll be picking up on doing invasive species control with volunteers on a regular basis and connecting with others in the Friends group to see how to get involved in some of those opportunities, and hopefully getting a good start on garlic mustard this season too.
As I mentioned, we are part of a larger group called the North Country SISMA. Our SISMA covers these counties and we're the furthest west. And as I was saying, it's basically a group of interested individuals that just want to manage invasive species and help out. So it could, in our group, it's all sorts of partnerships, watershed groups, road commissions, private landowners, anyone that's interested can kind of be a part of this group. So the Friends of Ludington State Park might be interested in doing more with invasive species work and could collaborate here. So just a couple of highlights. The staff here, you see on the bottom, Vicky, Zach, and Emma are all available to help landowners identify invasive species. We have a cost share program in place actually. So if you have certain species on your property and you want help managing those, we have a crew that will actually come out and do that at cost. And thanks to a grant, again, from the DNR, the grant will cover 50% of that and the landowner pays the other 50%. So it's a really great deal. You can get help managing invasive plants on your property for pretty low cost. And if you are a member of the Hamlin Lake Preservation Society, there's an extra bonus since Hamlin Lake Preservation Society really wants to see people manage invasives around the lake and protect the lake. They'll chip in too and make it even cheaper. So it's a great partnership. It's even maybe worth joining HLPS if you aren't already, and you can get that extra discount. Other things that the SISMA does, they'll come out and visit with you, identify things, and even show you how to manage it if you want to learn how to do it yourself. That's what the staff is here for. Everything is completely grant funded, but those are the type of things that are covered by the grants. So there's no cost to you to just have somebody come out and look at what you have and give you some tips. There's outreach events that happen all the time. Not so much in person lately, obviously, but hopefully we'll get back to that. In the past, we've done things like boat launch events where we talk about aquatic invasive species at the boat launch at Hamlin Lake in the state park to just let people know to clean their boat off, make sure they're not taking invasive plants with them or things like zebra mussels. So we're looking forward to hopefully getting back to that kind of thing in the future. And Kathy's going to touch on this, so I just want to breeze through it. But when I mentioned the cost share program, there are certain species that we have sort of set aside as high priority for our area. And I want to show you a few of those here. These are what would qualify for getting the cost share if you had these on your property. So Japanese knotweed is one that looks like giant bamboo. Garlic mustard, which Heidi mentioned, is one of the first things that we'll probably work on and see coming up this spring. It'll be flowering in April here soon. Wild parsnip we'll see later in summer, commonly along roadsides. It's showing up more in Mason County now, more so eastern Mason County, but this will have a bright yellow flower. And this is one that's more of a human health concern because it has sap that will cause phototoxicity. So basically, if you're out in the sun, you'll get a pretty bad rash, a reaction from the sap from this plant. So that's one we're trying to get under control and out of Mason County as soon as we can. To mention some others, these are more woody shrubs or trees. Glossy and common buckthorn are some that we work on. Cartier Park, which Kathy will talk about more so, is one place that we're looking at that. Tree of Heaven is a full-grown tree, and Ludington is really a hotbed of this one. I'm not sure how it got started here or where it came from, but this is a tree that has leaves somewhat similar looking to sumac. And if you crush up the leaves and smell them, a lot of people think it smells kind of like a funky peanut butter. And this tree sends up a lot of root suckers and will just keep spreading and spreading. So if you see someone that's cut down a tree in their yard in Ludington and they have about 50 more saplings coming up, that's what happened. They had Tree of Heaven and tried to take care of it, unfortunately, the wrong way. But it's okay. We're here to help. We can help correct that. And these are the last few here. So bristly locust, which we don't see a lot of around Mason County. Oriental bittersweet is a vine with these bright red berries in fall, which is pretty common around Ludington. And then Phragmites, which is a very tall reed in our wetlands. We've been working on that, managing that out in Pere Marquette Marsh and some other places around the county, but that's another one that's unfortunately pretty common. So I will leave it at that with our high priority species for our SISMA. My contact information is here if you wanted to jot it down really quick. Again, if you have questions, throw them in the chat and I will try to get to those. If you visit our website, we have an email list. So another shameless plug, if you want to learn more about what we do or hear about events that we have coming up, we do a monthly email newsletter and you can just jump right into that newsletter list from our website. So I will stop sharing my screen and leave everything there to turn over to Kathy. But thanks, everybody.
And thanks. I'm Kathy Winchesky, a member of a few. Also, I work with the Mason Lake Conservation District and lots of volunteer things. And I'm also the second ward city councilor for the city of Ludington. So I'm going to try to share my screen here a minute. Invasive species has been something I've been interested in for quite a while. I'm also a retired educator. And so, but so I wanted to talk a little bit about a few, the city of Ludington and a neighborhood attack on invasive species. So I've been involved in all of these and it's been really, really kind of nice. A few stands for A Few Friends for the Environment of the World. It was established in 1990 and I've been a member since just about the very beginning of that. A few really is concerned with promoting public awareness, hosting balanced discussions, and developing solutions to help generate the existence of a healthy environment. A few is really centered on a lot on education and a lot on just letting people know what is happening in our area of Mason County. They do a lot of beach sweeps. They've planted dune grass. We did battery recycling for a while. We do a lot with the Household Hazardous Waste Day. We do some river monitoring, which is coming up next weekend. A lot of recycling things. So just wanted to point out that right now, A Few is celebrating Earth Day virtually or in small groups in walking tours and stuff. So if you just went to afew.org, this is just a few of the things that they've got going. And today at 1 o'clock, they did exploring natural burial options, green burials, which was very interesting. And all month they're doing something. So if you're interested in looking at that, one of the things that they're doing here is a Earth Day quiz walk in Cartier Park. Cartier Park is a park here in Ludington on Bryant Road that's owned by the city. And what they've done is they've put some 20 stations out there, and it's a walkway of about 1.4 miles, and they're numbered, and they do educational things with invasive species at Cartier Park, Lincoln Lake that's at Cartier Park, and all kinds of things. So if you have a child or a grandchild that you'd like to take out there, I think it's up for the whole month. And that's just one of the activities they have. So help celebrate Earth Day all month with A Few. The city of Ludington works very heavily with us. A Few has, I think it's been, Danny and I talked, it was probably 4 or 5 years that we've been working on invasive species in the Cartier Park. I think Cartier Park has become or was a place where people would take their yard waste and just throw it out. and leave it there. And now it's turned into a park. So we're trying to clean that up. One of the partners in that is the city of Ludington. They let us borrow a lot of their heavy pruning equipment. They pick up all the waste that we have there and either burn it or dispose of it properly. And so they've been a real good partner along with a few on that. A few has been kind of the volunteers and the startup and go. The city of Ludington I always calls kind of the brawn and the workhorse with it. And then the Mason Lake Conservation District has also helped us with it. They're kind of the brains and the teachers of the whole thing. They take the volunteers from a few and take us out to Cartier Park and show us exactly how to attack those invasive species. We do invasive species attacks. This year, we're going to do it twice a month. It's going to be the second Tuesday at 10 a.m. and the fourth Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. to try to make it available for anybody who wants to come. It's a great way to watch the sunset over Lincoln Lake there if you want to come, and you can work for a half hour, you can work for an hour, whatever you want to, but it's been really effective. Some of the invasive species that we work with at Cartier Park specifically is garlic mustard. This is by far the easiest one to try to eradicate. It pulls up out of the ground very easy. It's very pretty, and we've made a huge dent in garlic mustard out at Cartier Park. It comes out early. It's coming up right now, but it's not ready to pull yet, probably a couple of weeks. Oriental bittersweet, whew, this one, if you look at this tree here, it strangles the trees. And I'm sure almost everyone has seen this somewhere, and you might not know what it is. It can, excuse me, whoops, so we want to go back on that. It can grow very, very thick. It can strangle that tree and actually take over the tree. This is what the leaves and flowers look like. It produces very pretty berries, orange berries, which Danny had a picture of in the fall. And a lot of people will make wreaths and things with them, but then the birds can peck those berries and take the seeds wherever. This Cartier Park is full of this, and Ludington is too, Mason County. So it's very hard to get rid of. You need to cut it and you need to treat it with some strong herbicide on that. That's a battle. Common buckthorn, we have some of this in Cartier Park, not a ton of it. It's kind of an understory brush situation. It can grow into a little bit of a bigger tree, but this one takes some herbicide to deal with too. This is that tree of heaven that Danny was talking about, and the tree of heaven or a devil in disguise. And I don't know how Mason County got so much of this, but Ludington's alleys, there is a ton of this in the alley right-of-ways and in people's backyards. Tree of heaven smells terrible when it's in flower. Some people compare it to rotten cashews. I don't know if I've ever smelled rotten cashews, but it doesn't smell good at all. The leaves are huge. They're between 1 and 3 foot long, and you can see it's got a lot of separate leaves. It's a pallated leaf on it. This tree can grow 2 to 3 feet per year. So once it starts going, it's very difficult to get rid of. This tree usually has to be girded and then treated with an herbicide to get rid of it. And if it grows real big, to take it down can involve power lines or your house or something. So this is a real problem here. But if you just look around town or look in your yard, you may have some of these. Again, SISMA will help with you eradicating this if you need help with that too. The one I really want to talk about that we've dealt a lot with too, and a little bit of this is in Cartier Park, is Japanese knotweed. And sometimes people call it Michigan bamboo, because if you look over here, it looks like bamboo. I had a friend of mine who had some of this in her backyard, and her sister came to visit a couple of years ago from Ann Arbor. She dug it up and took it to Ann Arbor and planted it in her backyard. And now they have an infestation of it in Ann Arbor in her backyard. Japanese knotweed, there's a little bit of that in Cartier Park. We've really eradicated almost all of it there. But something interesting happened 4 years ago now in my neighborhood. There was a young couple who had bought a house. And behind their house, behind their garage, were these things growing, these Michigan bamboo things. Well, they were in Kalamazoo most of the year, so they hired a landscaper to come in and cut down. They had bamboo that was this knotweed that was probably about 5 foot tall. He hired someone to come and just mow the whole thing down. It was probably in an area 12 foot by 8 foot square. So the guy came in and cut it all down. Well, over the course of 3 years, it started growing into his garage, through the mortar of his brick into his garage. He called the city and said, "What is this?" And the DPW director came to me, Department of Public Works came to me and said, "Do you think there's anything we can do to help this person?" Well, he happened to live in my neighborhood a block away. So we went and looked at that. I called Danny at the Conservation District. The SISMA came in and looked at this. There were several properties, 4 properties on that block in the alley that had the knotweed. And so we contacted all the neighbors and they all wanted to get rid of this because they had all been trying to fight it. And what do we do in Michigan? When something's in the yard, you don't want it, we either cut it down or we dig it up. Well, that's the worst thing you can do for Japanese knotweed because it expands by rhizoids under the ground. So if you cut it down, it makes it mad and it spreads faster and farther by the rhizomes under the ground. So it pops up all over. So we tackled this and Zach came and taught us how to inject an herbicide into these bamboo shoots. For 3 years, we injected and took care of that. And this year it's gone. And so we're hoping. I was just out there the other day and I didn't see any of the shoots. It was a neighborhood attack on this stuff. There were 5 of us that went out. We would go out. We did the injections in the fall and we did those and the money, everybody pitched in X amount of money for the herbicide and what we needed to do. The city of Ludington, if you leave this stuff, sometimes in one of the yards, we had to cut this down and put the herbicide inside instead of leaving it standing. The city of Ludington, we bagged it and the DPW picked that up because if you just let this lay down in your yard, it will reroot. This stuff is unbelievably, it's the worst thing I've dealt with by far, the Japanese knotweed. But what a great thing for the neighborhood to be able to do that. Now we would like to do the same thing in Cartier Park, which is a whole lot bigger area. But we're hoping to put some more dents in some of those invasive species in Cartier Park. So if anybody has any questions about invasive species or working with SISMA, they were great with my neighborhood. They came out every fall and helped us, taught us how to do it correctly. And we hope the Japanese knotweed is gone now. So thank you.
Thank you all for your presentations, and we can open it up if there are any questions. If you want to unmute and ask your question, or if you want to put it in the chat, you should feel free to do that as well. Heidi, when Kathy was talking about some of the invasive species, and especially the last one in terms of knotweed, is that also an issue in terms of the DNR on state property, or are some of those species, while viewed as invasive, are you aggressively eradicating that type of plant as well?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. We do actually manage several parks with Japanese knotweed, and if I can, I might actually try to share my screen again, and I'll show a little bit of some of our other projects. But yes, the short answer is we manage garlic mustard, Japanese knotweed, Oriental bittersweet, multiple invasive species, and DNR Parks and Recreation Division manages over 300,000 acres of property statewide. And as you guys know, some of that is really exceptional property. Ludington State Park has really fantastic resource, critical dune, habitat for species of greatest conservation need, habitat for stopover migratory birds. So the areas that we manage are very targeted. So for example, with Japanese knotweed, we may have locations statewide where we have Japanese knotweed in a parking lot or in a ditch. We try to, or a trail. We also have our trail system with places like the Calhaven Trail and some of those places you might be familiar with. We can't be there at all in all of those places. We have to really be very targeted in our approach. And with Japanese knotweed, a place like Saugatuck Dunes comes to mind. So I'm going to quickly share my screen and hopefully you can see that. So I'm going to type in Saugatuck Dunes State Park. And that'll take us right to Saugatuck Dunes and some of the places that we manage there. And all of those little dots there, those are all garlic mustard. We manage those with volunteers. If I turn on a layer here, I can probably pull up our knotweed. Let's see if there's any swallowwort or wild parsnip there. There might be, okay, Phragmites, knotweed, sweet clover, no sweet clover. Spotted knapweed, we don't manage that there as much as we do some other parks. We do manage that at Ludington. So if you can see the screen and see this example from Saugatuck Dunes, these are all invasive species that we manage. And there's a lot more that aren't on this list. So a species like Japanese barberry, I don't think that gets its own special layer here. Let's see what invasive points all gets us. We do a lot of this work working with volunteers and then also contracts. We target, I know at this park in particular, Saugatuck Dunes, we target knotweed in a couple of priority areas here. But yeah, to answer your question, that was probably a little bit more than you wanted. I will add to that through our volunteer efforts, all of these points, these garlic mustard spots that you see on the screen, that looks like a lot, and it is, but we hit all of that with volunteers, and that's how meaningful that work is for us, is the ability to get to all of these places and pull. And we track how much we do annually. When we first started managing garlic mustard with volunteers at Hoffmaster State Park about 10 years ago, I was working with volunteers pulling about 44 bags of garlic mustard a year. And that's, 44 garbage bag size bags. Now we're covering more territory within that park, and we pull about 4 to 5 bags a year. So it's through that effort that we're really able to make some meaningful progress in invasive species management. And that's all, that speaks to really the effort of the community and to the volunteers.
I know Danny's answering some questions in the chat. Are there any, Danny, that you want to talk about?
Thanks, Patrick. I might mention some Tree of Heaven information just briefly. Kathy did a great job explaining how tenacious it can be. But just since I know there's a lot around Ludington, it might apply to a number of folks. So Pat had a question about the best way to get rid of Tree of Heaven. With a lot of these things, there's always ongoing research. So there may be something new that comes up tomorrow that trumps what we're doing today. But at least our current methods that have been most effective from Vicky, our SISMA coordinator, has kind of looked at the research and our past treatments, and the basil bark spraying approach has been most effective. So that means leaving the tree where it is, not cutting it at all, and using a chemical that's formulated for woody tree species, and basically treating all the way around the tree from about 2 feet up, treating the bark with that herbicide from that 2-foot line down to the bottom at the grass level. And then the hard part is you need to just leave it alone. You need to just let that tree stand there for a year and soak up that herbicide, and it won't look like anything is happening. A lot of times folks want to just chop the tree down because now they're done with it and they want to move on. And that's the problem we've seen in Ludington a lot. Then we have all these resprouts and root suckers. So leaving it at least a year, making sure that tree is fully dead the next season. And once it is, then we can work on removing that dead tree. So if you do have more questions like that, or if you aren't sure if you have species like that, you can call our office at the Conservation District, I'll get you hooked up with Vicky and Zach and our SISMA staff, and they can come visit, or you could send us pictures, and we can help that way to figure out if you have some of those and how to help you deal with them.
Did you notice the question from Francie? Are there other bamboo-like plants in Michigan, she was asking?
I'm gonna ask Heidi too. None are coming to mind except for our two, at least for me, for our two bamboo looking species would be Japanese knotweed, or we also have giant knotweed, and those can hybridize as well into what we call Bohemian knotweed. But again, they're all still knotweeds. Others that look like that, you might be familiar with pokeweed, which commonly we might find in ditches or in old fields. It has that segmented look to it, but not a big hollow stem like a knotweed.
Yeah, Danny, I'll add to that. You're 100% right. And I will say that I've never met a knotweed I liked. If you're seeing something that grows, in general, when you see plants that grow like that, with few exceptions, that's not a typical pattern for a native plant to grow. So when you see that super dense bamboo growing together, or something like Phragmites, people are familiar with Phragmites. Well, we have native Phragmites, but it doesn't grow in that dense, super, pushy, super aggressive fashion. So yeah, I've never met a knotweed I liked. And I think if you're seeing something that looks like knotweed, it's probably not a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Heidi, there's a question from Donald Higgins. Do the hemlock infestation affect most of the branches, or can you miss it in inspecting only the lower ground level branches?
Yeah, so Danny would probably have some good experience to share with this too, and the work with our field crews is that unfortunately, due to the way that HWA spreads, it can spread from birds through animals. There's some evidence it can spread on equipment, with people. If you have it on your fleece, and you're kind of up close and personal with the hemlock, you can transport that. And it's kind of equal opportunity all over that branch. If it's spreading by a bird, it could be wherever that bird happens to land. One thing to add with that, though, is that when we're surveying, we do this with a lot of invasive species, is you kind of have to think like the vector. You think like a bird. You think like, for garlic mustard, sometimes you think about how a deer might spread that, or a person. And so you're focusing on trails, you're focusing on areas where it looks like wildlife might move to. And we take that same approach with HWA is, we got a lot of ground to cover. Danny's out there trying to do an amazing job on all the private property. We're trying to do the best we can on the public property. We really try to target areas when we're out surveying that it looks like maybe a bird might be attracted to. So if we've got a huge area to cover, and we're trying to cover as much ground as possible, we might try to put some extra effort into looking at trees that might be the highest on the top of a dune, and maybe a branch that's sticking out and in the open where a bird might decide to land. That takes a little bit of, kind of thinking like the vector. But to get to answer your question straight up, that HWA can be anywhere on the tree. It's all dependent on the vector and how it moves it. So it doesn't make it easy on the surveyor. So Danny, you want to add anything to that?
Well, you said it exactly like I was thinking it, Heidi. The only other thing, I guess you kind of touched on that we do too, we'll look at other ways of spread in terms of where there might be game trails. Like Heidi said, think like a deer. So we're following deer trails and looking more closely maybe at some hemlock trees that might be along a deer trail, or for example, in Ludington School Forest, looking at, spending more time looking at the trees that are right along the hiking path or the bike trails. We also just look at the ground, because often the wind is going to blow branches down for us that would have been higher up. So even though we can't see the high up branches, we're looking at what's falling on the ground. But yes, it's totally likely that we could be missing something that's there, just because you can only see so high up on a tree. There could be a lot of hit and miss based on the light to medium infestations that we found this winter. we're hopeful that that means we're catching it kind of early and that there aren't a ton more out there around the county, because it is kind of a lighter infestation on the trees that we've found.
Yeah, and for that reason, that's why we are treating trees that are positive, and we're going that extra effort to treat trees in the nearby vicinity with that in mind, that it's possible, we find a tree that has HWA on it. It's possible that the neighboring trees could have some there, but we just can't see it because it is, it's so small. So that's why we include those buffer areas, to make sure that we're getting really good coverage for what we may not be seeing.
To wrap up and by thanking our presenters tonight for this very informative session in terms of invasive species. And it's really actually very encouraging to know all the work that is being done across the state, but locally in terms of the Mason Lake Conservation District, and a few in terms of its volunteer activities to try to deal with the invasive species. And Heidi, hopefully there are individuals that are participating this evening that you'll get a chance to meet at the Ludington State Park for a tree planting or an invasive species event, since we're all, I think, very interested in ensuring that the state park continue to be the jewel that it is here in the West Michigan and Ludington area. So again, thank you for participating. We do have another session, as I mentioned at the very beginning, on the 29th, when Jim Galley will do a state of the Ludington State Park. So if you have not registered, please do so. And hopefully we'll see you on the 29th or out at the Ludington State Park hiking or enjoying the many wonderful things to do out there. Have a great evening. And again, thank you to our presenters.